Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strategy Gaming Dojo, where we find, learn, and play one more turn of the great strategy games. Now, today we are going to continue on with our Let's Play of Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific Admirals Edition. This is episode or part number 9, and we are in the Allied setup phase. So, the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th. We are now on December 8th, and we're setting up all of our forces here at the beginning. Now, we've been going in alphabetical order, following a spreadsheet developed by a user named Cole on the Matrix websites, and it's very, very helpful to help you set up all of these units. There are a ton of units in this game. It's very helpful to set those up and also just to learn the game. So we're kind of going through them one piece at a time, learning the game, setting up things, and getting them ready to go to start our war effort. So today we are going to be tackling the continental United States. That's the next thing in alphabetical order is the continental US. Now there is a lot going on the west coast of the US that generally we're going to either be sending to Pearl Harbor or to Australia or getting ready to go out to these little islands out here in the South and Southwest Pacific that we will need to control and protect against the Japanese. So we are going to, have task forces here. We're going to have a lot of training planes. There will be a lot of pilots that need to be trained in the US because the US starts the game with woefully trained pilots. If they were sent up against the Japanese early on, it's almost certain death because they just don't have any experience whatsoever. So we will be training a lot of those guys back in the US, getting them ready for eventually taking on the more experienced Japanese pilots. Now, when we look at the US, where are the two or three kind of main hubs? Well, Los Angeles and San Francisco are really the two massive hubs here on the West Coast. You can see LA starts with 603,000 units of fuel, 75, almost 75,000 in supply. But that fuel number, we're going to be trying to get as much of that over to Australia and Australia's heavy industry as we safely can. And we will be running convoys that head south initially. And I've talked about in past videos as we go south, here's Pearl Harbor. As we go south from Pearl Harbor, and maybe it'd be better if I pull up the big grand strategic map. You know I love to draw, so let's draw. Here's LA here. Here is San Francisco. We are going to be sending task forces this way and then this way to either Brisbane or Sydney down in this area. So we are going to try to build an iron crescent. I just like to say that. But we're going to be trying to build kind of an iron crescent here that goes from Port Moresby up here down through really through Nomaya here, but let's say Luganville, which is here, Pago Pago, down through this area, Christmas Island, Palmyra, and up to Pearl Harbor. We're going to be trying to build that defensive crescent. I mean, one reason is just in general to stop or slow the Japanese advance down, but probably the more important reason is to keep these supply lanes open to Australia. You just have to stuff Australia full of American fuel. So we will be attempting to do that. Now, when we talk about the continental US, we're not going to be dealing with the East Coast yet, that East Coast base. So let's get back over here to the continental US and go up here. This we're going to deal with this as an off-map base, quote unquote off-map. Of course, it's on the map, but it's not. It's an off-map base for our purposes. We will deal with that later. There's a lot going on there. We're primarily just going to be looking at LA, some San Diego. I mean, San Diego, in the grand scheme of things, is also a huge port. It's a port 7, 269 in fuel. So it is dwarfed by LA. which is will soon be a level 9 port and has 600. But San Diego is also, if it were in another part of the world, would be considered a massive base. Um, and then San Francisco, which eventually you see here, it starts with less fuel than LA, a little more supply. It already is a Port 9. You see all of the aircraft here. San Francisco is a huge staging base to send things out to Pearl Harbor, whereas LA, I usually use that more to kind of go to the islands, down to Australia. San Francisco, more Pearl Harbor, and then we daisy chain from Pearl Harbor down if we want things to go into the South or Southwest Pacific. But these are the two big ones. Um, Up here, of course, we have Seattle, which is also, it's going to build into a level 8 port. It's got a good size airfield. You see a lot of fighters here. And we'll be talking about, we've got air headquarters all over the place out here. We've got different air groups. So this is the 2 U.S. Fighter Command. The good thing about the 2 U.S. Fighter Command is that it's part of the 5th USAAF, and the 5th USAAF is part of the Southwest Pacific Group. And so this 2 U.S. fighter group can go out to the Pacific. We don't have to buy that out. Whereas, down here, at March Field, which is right behind LA. There are a lot of fighters out here. A lot of these fighters are part of the 4th, either U.S. Bomber or U.S. Fighter Command. They are locked to the U.S. So they're more training groups, really. But we'll get into all that. I just kind of wanted to set the board for you. We've got things up here like Ogden. Just randomly, Ogden, Utah has a huge airfield. We can train pilots out here. Portland's got some stuff. We got some stuff up and down the coast. I'm reminded of one of the great World War II movies ever when we look at all of this supply in the U.S., and that is, of course, the great movie Tora, Tora, Tora. If you've never seen it and you're interested in this era of warfare and the Pacific War, you should check that out. It's really about the it shows kind of it's interesting. It shows a lot of the Japanese perspective leading up to Pearl Harbor, as opposed to most American movies at that time, which were sort of war propaganda. But this showed kind of what the Japanese were doing or thinking going into Pearl Harbor, and of course their code word for launching the attack was Tora, Tora, Tora. But at the end of that movie, General Yamamoto is standing on the bridge of his ship, and one of his subordinates comes up and says, the Pearl Harbor bombing, they were totally surprised. It's gone very well. And Yamamoto says, I'm afraid all we've done today is awaken a slumbering giant. And he proved very prophetic in saying that the United States, once it ramped up its production, simply overwhelmed the world. Now, you can say that's capitalism, you can say it's good old American ingenuity, or whatever you want to say. But once the US got its production facilities going, it simply overwhelmed the rest of the world. And that is certainly the case against the Japanese in the Pacific. As the game goes on, the amount of fuel, supply, planes, ships of all types that you start to get, and then in the numbers, and then the quality really ramps up in 43 and into 44, uh, will astound you if had never known just exactly why the U.S. ended up winning the war in the Pacific, along with its allies, of course. I don't mean to diminish the contribution of the other allies, but also in Europe. Um, you will see a production that is completely unrivaled. But anyway, we are going to set this all up, and I am going to go do that. It may take me a little time, but for your purposes, I will be back momentarily and we'll go through the continental US. Okay, I have returned after that setup. That only took me maybe 2 or 3, maybe 2 hours. I'm pretty quick at it now. I've set this up many a time. And once you do that, you start to get used to the units. And you say, oh, yeah, that's that unit that goes to Astoria, and you just kind of recognize. Now, one thing I was going to say. I know some of you, or many of you, are new to the game, or you wouldn't be watching this. When I set up, an area like this, one thing I always do is bring up the bases and I put them in alphabetical order. And that way, as I go down, sometimes you won't remember exactly, where certain bases are, like Coos Bay. If you've never heard of Coos Bay, if you've never been to Coos Bay, there's probably no reason. And rather than spend like 5 minutes searching around the map, just bring up, don't forget, you can always bring up the list all bases, put them in alphabetical order, flip down there and say, oh, Coos Bay. Because when you do, you can hit over here and it'll take you right to the base. Also, if you're having problem finding a unit, or whatnot, just, always remember you can go up here, look at the units, you can search. I mean, for this one, you could take off all units, all nations, and just have US Navy, US Army, US Marines, and that, lessens the list, and then it'll just be in alphabetical order, and you can look at it that way. So as you're going through setting up these things, you'll come up with your own shortcuts or ways that you like to do it. But that's how I like to do it, is just, alphabetize those bases. And sometimes I'll go up here and search for the units if I can't find them for some reason. But anyway, when I was setting this up, it dawned on me, I had built up, oh my gosh, the United States has all of this stuff. And that is true as the war goes on, of course. Really, right at the start, it's not that overwhelming. Um, there's quite a few ships at San Francisco. There actually is not that much at Los Angeles. We have a lot of convoys coming from Australia back to LA, or coming to LA the first time to load up and go back to Australia. But most of the planes that would, you know, be based at LA maybe normally are actually back here at March Field. There are, more ships here at San Diego than there are at LA to start with. Now, we do have some big tanker groups. We also have some big transport groups that we built this turn. Or I say this turn, we're still in the first turn, but built in this section here in the continental US that are getting ready to go to Pago Pago or Nomaya. Some of those islands I've been talking about a lot as we talked about the strategy in this game. Those transports are getting ready. And maybe you noticed as you set this up, but if you have one massive disadvantage, well, there's probably two or three. But one of the massive disadvantages for the Allies right at the start is they have very few transports. So they have a lot of stuff to transport, a lot of different places to go with things, and not many transports to get them there. So we have all of these, artillery pieces, we have anti-aircraft, we do have some infantry, that is not locked. We have some engineering units that we need to get out to the Pacific, and we just don't have that many transports. I mean, if it's a one for one thing, in the fact that you need to have one transport per each unit, regardless of load costs. Never forget that. That even if you've got a trillion load capacity on a transport, it can only take one unit. Okay, so one unit per transport, and there, you just don't have enough at the start. Now you will be getting quite a bit, but you don't have it right at the start. So before we dive into very specific things here on the continental US, I did want to deal with a question that's come up, and that is on merging air squadrons. Okay, now squadrons, these containers here, are alike in one way to task forces, right? Because, it's one unit, it's one container on the map that's actually got quite a few elements in it. So this fighter group could maybe have 20 planes in it, this fighter squadron. So it's alike in a task force like that, in that a task force, it's got a counter that is one ship, but it's really a container for groups of ships, right? Um, but the air groups, air squadrons differ from ships in the fact that to be in an air squadron, all of the planes have to be identical. Okay, they can't just be P-40 Warhawks in general. They have to be P-40E Warhawks. So when we drag this up here, we've got the P-40E Warhawk. Now there are only two here, but you could not merge the P-40B fighters into this squadron. A squadron has to be all like make of aircraft, right? And also the another difference is you cannot create your own air squadrons. You can't go out here, click on a button. It doesn't say, over here at the airfield, create air squadron like it does create task force with the ships. And with the ship, that's nice, right? You can click on that button, your little container, your little unit counter comes up, and then you can start putting ships in there as long as they can run that kind of mission, and that's how that's done. But with air squadrons, it doesn't work that way. However, air squadrons can be consolidated. Okay, so you've got a lot of these air squadrons out here that maybe have two, they maybe have four, they maybe, whatever number of planes. And never forget that right up here, Squadron US Army, you can see the maximum number of planes that can be in this squadron. So this could have 5 planes in it, and we've only got two. Now, I have not merged this. The instructions on the Cole spreadsheet are to merge this air squadron with this one. So this is the 51st PG 16th PS. It's unit ID number 4017. We are supposed to be merging this squadron with this squadron. Well, let's talk about that for a second, okay? They're both P-40E Warhawks, sure enough, okay? So they should be able to do that. They also have similar commands, okay? So this has a command of the 10th USAAF. This has a command of the 10th USAAF. If those two things are true, they should be able to merge. Now I'm going to tell you, click on the button to disband group when you're taking the unit you're going to merge into the other, and read very carefully. There may be some reason that they can't merge with that air squadron. Um, just read those carefully, right? It's not going to be the end of the game if you merge something with the wrong thing, or if it doesn't merge and it goes back to the pool, or whatever. It's not, these are 2 planes, right, out of thousands and thousands of planes. But I know it is frustrating. So it can be very frustrating when you click on that button. You're like, ah, crap. Because once you do that, you really can't get it back. It's kind of like transfer to base. Once you do that in a turn, you better write down a note if you did it wrong, because you're going to have to transfer it again next turn. You can only do it once a turn. When you disband a group, it merges into another. It may take you a little while to get it all sorted out. So I know that's frustrating. So anyway, these two can merge. Now I wanted to show an example of something that cannot, because I was like, oh, well, there are a lot of P-40Bs here, right? P-40B, those are lightnings. Okay, P-40B. These two, I believe, could merge together. Now, we could hit the disband group and make absolutely sure, but they should be able to. They have a similar command. They have a similar make. Now, the P-38 Lightnings here, though, so P-38 Lightning, this one is attached to the 10th USAAF. This one is attached to the 4th U.S. Bomber Command. You could not merge this into this squadron, although you may be able to merge this squadron into this squadron. And you may be saying, wait a minute, you just blew my mind. Not really, I don't think. Once you think about it for a second, you could not merge this into this. Why? Because you could do an end run around buying out commands, right? So this is right now landlocked to the US, this fighter squadron, because it's attached to the 4th. You cannot buy this out. Now the 4th, eventually we could maybe buy out. I don't think you can, but whatever. For these purposes, it doesn't matter. The point being is this squadron is attached to the 4th, and you cannot buy that out. Likewise, you could not merge it into a squadron that does not have to be bought out, right? Because it's a total end run around that system of trying to keep historical. And, these units, if they can be, you have to pay a price for getting them out into the Pacific. But for our guys here, these two have already been quote unquote bought out. They're able to go to the Pacific. They're part of the 10th USAAF, which is Southeast Asia. So actually, they could go all the way around, to India and Burma, which is Southeast Asia, or down into, potentially into Malay. So anyway, let's get around to merging this thing. So this one is supposed to go into the other one. The reason being is this container can only hold 5 aircraft. This container can hold 25, right? So you're generally going to want to put a smaller one into a bigger one. Why limit yourself? So let's disband group. Disband group. Okay, this did not give us any warnings. Now, what you want to be looking for is if it says all planes and pilots will be lost, you want to hit no immediately, right? Why do that if you don't have to? If the game's not forcing you to do it or you don't have to withdraw them, don't do it. But when it just comes up like this, disband group, they are going to merge into any like group at their base if there is one, okay? Which would be this group. If there is more than one where it's eligible to merge into it, you will get a pop-up screen that says which one do you want it to go to, okay? So if we hit yes here and there were 5 that it was eligible to merge into, it would give us a screen and we would click on the one we wanted it to merge into. But in this case, we only have one. So we're going to hit yes. Now see, it just told you that those pilots transferred here. And then it says reform group in 120 days. Generally, you always want to hit yes to that. So that squadron will come back in 120 days and it will be stocked with planes from the reserve pool or that have been created for that squadron. Okay, so now when we come down here, we've now got 6 serviceable planes, 7 that are being maintained. But before, I think we had oh, I should have looked. I think we had 4 and 7. We just put 2 more in here. So they're over here now, and you'll see that unit counter is gone. It has merged into this one. And that's why you can only merge into like commands or like makes of aircraft. It is a total merger into that. So I just wanted to cover that because maybe that's something I didn't cover enough in the aircraft tutorial. And let's talk about some interesting things that are going on here. Okay, one thing we're going to do is look for the war sprite. Where did that sucker go? Because I want to talk about the Colorado and the war sprite. Well, now I've already put them into maintenance, and I'm going to have to sit here and figure out where the heck they are. I wish I wouldn't have done that. Show ships under repair. We've got some here under repair. Okay. Pure side. Are these guys down here or are they up here? Sorry, I should have looked this up. I think they're in Seattle, aren't they? Yeah, here we are. The Colorado and the Warspite. These are 2 battleships that start the game with some system damage. The Colorado has some engine damage. So we are putting them into the shipyard here at Seattle. It's going to take the Colorado 25 days and the Warspite 17 days, but that's great. That's 2 battleships that we're going to get back. Now, at the start of the game, or when I pulled this up, they were just sitting, you know, at anchor in Seattle. You have to go in there, you click on this, of course, you come down here, you stand them down, you put them in the shipyard, and 25 days. Now, it's good that this didn't sink. It's worth 185 points, the Colorado is, and is a halfway decent battleship. It's not as good as what you're going to get later, but you've got 185 points. The Warspite's 188. This is a British battleship, actually, that just happened to be over here in Seattle. It's smoking a little bit, but it's only going to take 17 days in the shipyard to repair this damage. So in about a month, we will be sailing these out. We'll try to get some destroyers up with these guys because by then the Japanese will have a submarine presence over here. Last thing you want to do, get these guys repaired, sail them here, and get blown the heck up by a Japanese submarine. So I've don't ask me how I know that sucks, because it's possible that I still have some nightmares about that one. So we've got the worst bite in the Colorado. I wanted to point those out to you. I also wanted to point out this airfield at Boise. We had a lot of planes that started at Boise, and we have converted those all into ASW planes that are flying out of Tacoma. Okay, so these level bombers, a lot of them are these level bombers. We've got, planes are training all up and down the coast here, right? Here it is. These guys, I believe, came out of Boise. And so we've got them here at Tacoma. We've got them at Portland, I believe. We've got some, we've just got ASW planes. Oh, Corvallis, that's the other one. There we go. Corvallis. We're trying to run as much ASW as we can over here. Now, one thing you may have noticed as you were setting this up, as compared to, let's say, Australia, there are very few ASW ships. There just are not very many anti-sub ships. The US started off quite a bit behind. I don't know if it was the technology or, they were thinking more about a war in Europe. I just don't know what the history behind that is. But whereas the British start with some really good anti-sub ships, some that are a level 4, some that are even a level 8, the US has very few, and you probably saw we've got some that we stick together that are both ones, and we're just trying to get enough anti-sub warfare to be plausible, to make it where we've got any. And it's unfortunate because you've got a lot of high value tankers and ships coming out of here, especially when you have the transports coming out. You just do not have much anti-sub warfare, so you want to get these out of here as fast as you can before the Japanese have a chance to get their submarines down here, because it can become a nightmare. And again, I may know that from experience, but the Japanese and a smart Japanese player, what would you do if you were playing the Japanese, right? I would put like 3 submarines right here because everything, and I would put, another 2 or 3 here, and then the rest of them maybe at Pearl Harbor or something. Now, this is a long ways to go for the Japanese player, and these guys maybe can't stick around that much, but I can tell you they can get out here, and it's part of our strategy. We'll talk more about this, obviously, but Midway, if they try to turn that into a sub base, I think the Japanese player, their main sub base over here at the start maybe is Truck. Don't quote me on that. I don't ever play the Japanese, and maybe I should because I would understand the Japanese player better. But I almost kind of feel like it's cheating to know their exact setup. I just always have played the Allies. But let me tell you, their subs early in the game can get over here. They can also get down here to Sydney, and they will, make your life a living hell when they do. But we just do not have much ASW. I can also tell you a little later in the game, uh, when I say a little later, I'm talking generally in that context, like in a month or so. Uh, Down here at Panama, the Panama Canal, we will get a lot of American destroyers. I'm thinking like 8 or 10 of them that all have radar, okay, and they have surface radar, and they are all either 4s or 6s. I think maybe there are even some that are an 8 that are very good for anti-sub. But you could never have enough destroyers because you've got so many tankers. You've got, you need to have 4 or 5 destroyers at least with your aircraft carriers. And we now have an aircraft carrier on the board over here. This time, I always get excited when I set up the aircraft carrier task forces. I, you know, I don't know. I think it's cool. They are the lion of the jungle, right? And so I really like to set those up. And this time we got to set up the Saratoga, but it's got some, fairly crappy destroyers out here. Within a month, you never want your aircraft carriers out here sailing with, level 2 ASW destroyers. That is a recipe for disaster. So we will get those good, level 6, level 4, level 6, level 8 destroyers with much better range in with the aircraft carriers here and the aircraft carriers we're going to have out at Pearl Harbor as fast as we can. But then, I mean, you've just got so many task forces where you need those good destroyers because you cannot afford to have a Japanese submarine find one of these massive tanker task forces that we've built. Look at this one, right? I mean, this has got almost 50,000 in fuel that it'll be carrying. We do have a destroyer with it, but this is again a level two, and it's not really got any anti-aircraft. You know, it's a it's a ship. It's a ship. They may say, "Hey, I think I saw the wake of a submarine over there," but it's probably not going to do a whole lot against a good Japanese submarine. So anyway, gosh, I went off on the Saratoga, which is the next thing I wanted to talk about. So we did put this together. The Saratoga was sitting down here, kind of on its lonesome. Now, the Saratoga's fine. It's got, oh, let's go back here for a second. Yeah, I wanted to look at this. Carrier aircraft, it can carry up to 84. We've got 83 on board. All right. Our light cruiser has two float planes that, will be going around doing some naval search for the most part. That's usually what you have float planes do, either ASW or naval search. They're like patrol planes, right? But we can carry up to 84, which really is not, our maximum for sure. Now, you may have been surprised. Aircraft carriers actually have a really good speed about them. So we've got destroyers in here that will not slow them down. Everybody's moving at a 33 with the light cruiser moving at a 34. Okay. But really, you want to key everything off of this aircraft carrier because that's the big dog on the block. Uh, Again, remember, this is the number of sorties that can be flown before we need to go back somewhere to a level 7 port or above generally and get rearmed. These planes on here can fly up to that many sorties. Now let's go look at the planes on the Saratoga. We have two squadrons of fighters. We have 14 Buffaloes. We could have up to 18. We have 21 Wildcats. Now, when we get over to Pearl Harbor, so we're sailing this out to Pearl immediately. We're going to try to get our three aircraft carriers that are out there together, kind of get them hanging out. Because early in the game, the Japanese aircraft carriers are better than ours, mainly because their aircraft's a lot better than ours, their pilots are a lot better than ours. And so the more we can kind of stick together, the better off we are in case the Japanese, do something crazy, do a U-turn, come back and really want to pick a fight. We don't want to hide so much that these guys are all back in San Diego, right? We want them to be out in Pearl Harbor because that's our major base in the Pacific, but we also don't want to fight if we can help it. Okay. And then once we kind of move along and we get more advanced pilots and whatnot, we can create big, aircraft carrier task forces, a lot bigger than what we have here, and they will be a little bit a part of everything. I send, one down, usually down by Pago Pago. Maybe we'll have one at Christmas. We'll start to form that Iron Crescent. And believe me, having 84 planes you can put in the air definitely helps with that. So what have we done with these planes? What are their orders going to be? Well, their main order is always going to be escort. So they will be doing escort, but when they're not escorting, they will be doing cap over the task force and they will be still training. Now, this training is very high because we're still back in San Diego. Once we get out to Pearl, we're probably going to, want to lower that down. I will say the ready pilots out here, your carrier pilots as the Americans early on are far and away your best pilots. I mean, if we don't count the Flying Tigers over in China and Burma, these are your best pilots, okay? 69. Now, I don't know, I mean, we did mention it, I know I mentioned it when we talked about carriers, but always remember that anything that you want to load onto a carrier and actually fly missions off the carrier and do something with it needs to be carrier trained and capable. Okay? Carrier trained They can land there. They can't really fly any offensive missions off of it. It needs to be carrier trained and capable. And for that, you need really good pilots. So 69's pretty good. Um, we will hope that that bumps up quite a bit. And, we'll be cycling pilots in as they get better and better. So you've got the Wildcats, you've got the Buffaloes. They also are carrier cables stationed on the Saratoga. Um, They are not trained. They will get trained as they fly missions. We will be training them off of the flight deck here to get them carrier trained. It's very important that that be the case. These guys are only 50-50. That's not good. So we've got them, whoop, 100. We want them to be carrier trained. Now, we also have these Devastators. They are torpedo planes. Now, we say using torpedoes, nope. We're going to keep this locked in here. We actually do have this air unit at San Diego loading up torpedo ordnance. Now, one thing you may have noticed, so this is how you get your torpedoes. You get them from these air wings. You may have noticed that this started with 0, and then maybe you clicked on this and tried to enter in 40, and it wouldn't let you. And if you read up here, it makes you do it 20 at a time. Torpedoes are actually fairly scarce items, especially at the start, but really throughout the war, torpedoes were not nearly as um, prevalent as maybe you've seen in movies or you think about them being. Torpedoes are kind of an unstable sort of device. They're hard to store, they're hard to transport. There aren't nearly as many as you would think. I think I mentioned that before. But anyway, we're going to leave these, sorry, I clicked off that. We're going to leave these torpedo bombers using torpedoes. Now, if they don't get any torpedoes, they will automatically switch to bombs. Don't just think, well, it's red, these guys aren't going to do anything. That's not how it works. They will be running anti-submarine warfare off this. Now, you may notice this is one of those times we have not set an arc. And usually so far, I think, in almost all these tutorials, we set an arc, a search arc. If you do not set an arc, the computer just flies around that circle randomly. I can't remember if the circle comes up here. It does not. But anyway, I guess it doesn't matter, right? I mean, we can look. We don't have to. We can figure out what that circle would look like because they have an extended radius of 5. We're. I keep trying to say sailing. I don't know why. We're flying them out to an extended radius of 5, and so it'll be that concentric circle out to its maximum extent. And they will be doing this ASW search. That doesn't mean, if they run across a surface task force, they may drop a torpedo in the water, but that will be commander discretion. They're looking for ASWs. Now we have 2 Dauntless groups, these squadrons. They're carrier trained and capable. They're on the Saratoga. They are dive bombers. You'll notice Cole sets a lot of his bombers at 6 or 7,000 feet or 9,000 feet, kind of depending on what they're doing, whether they're coming off land or off ships. But hopefully you're getting a feel for altitudes. I know it's something that gives a lot of people problems when they first start playing the game, which is I have no idea what altitude to set things at to do things. I will tell you with dive bombers, no matter what altitude you set them at, they will drop down to 200. Well, I think it's 1,000 feet or 200 feet. For some reason, I can't remember those specifics, but for your purposes, it really doesn't matter. The point being is they drop down, they're dive bombers. They come down to drop their bombs. And so they will be doing, we're going to have them training naval search here. The other Dauntlesses are going to, oh, that is the same group. Sorry. The other Dauntlesses are going to be doing naval search from the start. 210, 310 or 210, 300 arc. So we're going to be, coming out to Pearl Harbor from east to west, and they will be searching to our west on a 210, 300 vector. So they will be out there looking. We got them at their maximum range of 8. Look at this. We've got these are some good pilots out here. We actually do have some that are good, and they're out here on the Saratoga, right where you would want them to believe me. So anyway, that's the Saratoga. That's fun. I really, like I said, I get kind of excited when I see the carriers and whatever. Um, Now Fresno, I wanted to point out up here at Fresno. Oh, gee, I actually live in California. How do I not know where Fresno is? It's right there. Fresno, we had quite a few planes here. And as I mentioned, in the lead in here, a lot of these we transferred to the East Coast. Most of them are going to be withdrawn or need to be withdrawn sometime in January. Now, we don't really want to do that yet, right? Because we need to train all the pilots that we can. But we do want to get them out of the way. We don't want them using up our aviation support over here. We don't want to have to keep aviation support on the West Coast that we could ship to the Pacific. Um, so why not go back to this Eastern, why not send them by rail back here to the East Coast? The East Coast has 540 in aviation support. It's only using 244. Now, it's got uh, all of that aviation support pretty much from its base force and just naturally. So, it's got all of that. Why not send planes back here to train? It's not going to be attacked. We don't have to worry about anything. We don't even really need that aviation support except to train pilots. So if something's going to be withdrawn in a month, there's no reason to keep it out here soaking up aviation support. You're not going to send it anywhere. You're not going to take the time to do that. Kick it back to the East Coast. Let them train. So I did want to point that out. Now let's talk about LA. Let's talk about one of the bigger places here that we set up. LA has kind of a surprising lack of things right at the start. One of the things that we do, we had talked about resources in a previous episode and then went back and said, hey, there are some pockets of resources here. Resources are important. You need resources to make supply. Um, LA has a ton of resources, 16,000 already. So we have put together a task force to, get a bunch of those resources, go out to Pearl Harbor and drop them off. That's great. Then you can create things out of Pearl Harbor out of those resources. But yeah, LA looks to be a huge resource supply, or, they've got a huge supply of resources. So I just wanted to point that out because I've kind of downplayed resources a little bit. And I think for good reason. As you've seen, we've moved around the map. 98% of the time we're moving fuel or supply. But resources are not unimportant, and we may eventually make this a CS, a continuous back and forth to Pearl, but I didn't want to do that yet. We'll see what happens. They're going to pull, what, 13,000 of these out immediately, and I just don't remember how much starts to stockpile there, or how much will, sit there as it gets pulled in from the rest of the West Coast. But I didn't want to talk about that. And also at LA, I wanted to talk about having a lot of these ships waiting. I like to not have ships in port. Here we have 11 ships just waiting around. They are really waiting around for troops. We have two APs here, transports, where we are going to be loading troops on them in fairly short order. It's not going to be that long. And we keep some of these cargo ships around for that same purpose because they're going to have equipment. If they're base force things, they're generally going to have equipment. You're going to need cargo ships for that. And we just have some more waiting around because you just don't have a ton at LA. I mean, you could move this fuel, but it's very inefficient to do it by AKs. And most of these, maybe not this one, but most of these are not really fitted to go all the way to Australia. They would be better for a jump to Pearl Harbor. We already have massive task forces from San Francisco going there. So these are going to kind of wait around at LA, at least momentarily. Okay. The other thing I wanted to point out about LA is how terrible the ASW is here. You have two patrol boats this is what I was talking about. Excuse me. As far as putting the one ASWs together, this is what we've had to do at LA. You have no anti-submarine warfare ships here. We've put two of these patrol boats together, and this is our ASW LA, and that's it. I mean, they're running this little pattern. We have got to get destroyers. We've got to get other anti-sub stuff up here, or you're courting disaster. So that's LA, and as part of LA, March Field back here is a very busy airfield. You've got two fighter commands back here. Well, not fighter. You've got one fighter command, the 4th U.S., um, which generally is going to be locked to the U.S. You have the 4th USAAF. I always think when I see the 4th, crap, they're stuck in the U.S. They are really so if we look back at the 4th fighter, it's attached to the 4th USAAF. That's its command unit. Um, and then the 4th USAAF, which is the air headquarters, is attached to the West Coast. So they're going to be sitting out here training a lot of pilots, and that's what we've got all these guys doing. This is also where we just merged that fighter group, but these are all fighter groups training. And for the most part, they're fours, but we did see that the one that we merged and this one are 10th USAAF, and so we will be getting these two out to the Pacific. We'll hop down to LA, put them on a transport when we have them, and get them out to the Pacific, wherever we decide we're gonna, send the 10th USAAF. So that's LA and March Field. Um, yeah, we already talked about that merge. We've got troops that are going to go to Nomaya out of LA. I did want to mention that. And the reason, oh, I had written down in my notes, the reason that we're keeping a lot of those cargoes out there, cargo ships there at LA is, we're going to have to take the supplies and equipment for those troops out to Nomaya. We want, as part of that task force, to also stuff Nomaya full of supply. Um, Mare Island. So let's go up here to San Francisco and talk about. Uh, Shoot, I always go too far when I do that. I always go up to Seattle because, given the scale of the map, I never think of San Francisco and LA being this close together. Now, then you realize how the scale of the map, they're really not that close together. You're just talking, huge amounts of territory here. Um, San Francisco has Mare Island behind it. It's also got, these other three bases, so four bases that kind of surround it, whether it be Alameda or Alameda, Stockton or Sacramento. You can do different things here with these. You can train some pilots if you want, but really it all revolves around San Francisco. One of the things we did here is we've got these ACMs. Now, don't forget that these ACMs are, they maintain your mines. So we're just going to make this mine SF. These ACMs are specialized ships that maintain mines. And I've pointed this out in a tutorial before. Let's go to San Diego. Whenever it shows you how many defensive mines you have in port, it'll show you how many ACMs you have present because they stop the degradation of your mine. Well, they don't fully stop it, but they're basically a ship that goes around and makes sure your mines are in good order, and it keeps you from having to lay mines like every turn because they can keep existing mines in good shape. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to click on these things multiple times. In San Francisco, we have one ACM, but we also have a lot of defensive mines. We do not need an ACM here in Mare Island, so we're just taking this, putting it down in San Francisco, and we'll have two ships taking care of our mines down there. At Mare Island, we also have this transport and a destroyer tender. Okay, so a destroyer tender would be able to rearm a destroyer or, give a destroyer supply out at sea somewhere. They're, supply depots. Anything that's called a tender is a supply depot essentially that moves on the water. But we've got this. We're going to put eventually put some troops on there. We're merging this with the San Francisco to LA task force, which I would imagine has now been created. So I will go after this episode. I'll have to say, well, let's see if we can go find it. Meet task force. Let's go down here and let's see if we can find which transport. Oh, there's no way we're gonna. Okay, so this is how I would do this in game. Um, exit. Let's get out of that. Let's go to San Francisco. Let's look at the transport that's going to LA. I think it's this one. Let's just make sure there's not another one. Oh, of course there is too. Um, well, I guess for these purposes, in some respects, may not matter. We've got destroyers with both of these going to LA. This is to transport those P-39 planes that are at March Field that we're going to take out to the Pacific. Let's just put them with this group. This is Task Force 269. Now, you know me with the OCD, I will go back and make sure this is correct. But for now, I'm just going to do it this way. Now we click on the task force there. We're going to look for 269, click on that. It will meet that task force and it will show you exactly where they are going to meet them. Okay? I actually, before this episode, did not go back and look at all the merge ones. I'll have to do that afterwards to make sure I don't forget any of those, but that is one of them. Okay, so we've taken care of that. Um, oh, this AVP, it's an aircraft tender. Same idea. This is a supply depot for what could be float planes. We are sending this to Eureka and setting up kind of a mobile base here for airplanes that we can run some ASW off of, right? So this is just kind of like, sending supply up here for airplanes, and you can do these, kind of mobile bases for mobile airfields. So we are doing that. So that was Mare Islands. Really wanted to talk to you about that. Pendleton. Now Pendleton, I did not know a whole lot about. It's kind of out here. I've never been to Pendleton. I've been through this area of the country, but I've never been over here to Pendleton. This had a lot of I'm sorry, a lot of planes that we turned into ASW planes up and down the coast. So we flew them all out of Pendleton, transferred base, you know, over here. Well, this is fighters, but I think we did some to Seattle or to Tacoma. And it's these level bombers, these bolos, and we're running, ASW with that. It makes sense to take them out of Pendleton and do that with them. So we did that. Um, Oh, the another interesting thing I wanted to point out on the West Coast, down in San Diego. So San Diego had a lot of ships, right? It had the carrier. We have this huge tanker task force that's coming out of there. We have some cargo to Pearl Harbor. We have some transports that are going to go to Pago Pago. And so a lot was going on here, but I did want to mention we had this because as we get into this and you get to know the game better, I'm trying to just point out things that are kind of interesting or different. And we have this one group here that's going to go up to Dutch Harbor. Here it is. This is a submarine tender, okay? This is a floating supply depot for submarines, and we are taking this up to Dutch Harbor, and I just thought this was kind of fun. We're going to put this up here at Dutch Harbor in Alaska and make kind of a floating submarine base because we do have some submarines that are going to operate here. We also have the chance that we may have a submarine that gets wounded here, maybe even up here, you know. We may be running, depending on what the Japanese are up to, we may be running submarines here. And if it were to get wounded, or maybe we want to resupply it really quickly, we could bring it back here to Dutch Harbor and do that instead of having to bring it all the way down here to Pearl Harbor. Dutch Harbor is just a lot closer. So we're making kind of a floating submarine tender out here. And I thought I would point that out because that's kind of that's kind of fun. Um, I wrote down for San Francisco that we're sending lots of ships to LA because we are. The mainly the ones that have a big endurance. and they could probably make it over to Australia. We're sending those down. Now, we are also out of San Francisco sending a huge task force to Sydney. So you see this, it's all of these ships. It's 42,000, right? So we're loading up a ton of supplies for Sydney. Now you see this 327 out of 358. These barely make it there and or they don't make it there and back completely. These two guys do. Now Cole said, you know, no refuel maybe. I put these on minimal refuel so they'll get topped off a little bit there in Sydney so they can make it back. Now always remember when you're going to Sydney from someplace like San Francisco, set your waypoint and always click same return same route because I guarantee you right now, each and every one of you that play this game, instead of this route happening, so here's the route, and this will be a very normal route for things from LA and San Francisco. It comes down here just north of Bora Bora and then cuts straight across. We come underneath Pago Pago, Suva, we come underneath Nomaya, and straight into Sydney. That's why we're building the crescent right here to keep the Japanese from being able to bomb this route. But I guarantee you, as you play this game, at some time or another, you're going to be flipping across the map and you're going to see a task force, your own task force right here, and you're going to say, what in the world is going on? You're going to click on that and it's going to say Cargo Sydney with a home port of San Francisco, and that sucker is going to be booking it back here across across this danger zone, right? And that's all going to be because you did not click return same route. We want it to go back down and around. We sure as heck don't want it to go back the fastest route. That is a very easy way to have some cargo ships get absolutely mauled. So always keep that in mind. Um, I wanted to point out in Seattle that we had something really interesting going on, I thought, or something different and cool. Um, we've got, where did we send those? We sent them all the way back here to Ogden. We've got these three fighter groups that came out of Seattle, and they all have drop tanks, okay? And so when they put on their drop tanks, you see their maximum range, how that pops up. Now you can take it off and you see how it pops down. Now, drop tanks, we have not really gone into that. We turned these on to hop them out of Seattle and to hop them over to Ogden, right? Because it was out of their range otherwise. When we turned it on, we could go 21 hexes, maximum range for your base hop. Um, these drop tanks, you really only want to use them for a purpose like that or a very specialized mission, okay? And I'm talking early in the war. Later on in the war, if you're bombing the Japanese islands, you may have to use drop tanks. You don't have to be scared to use them. There's no, you know, there's no reason you can't use them, but generally early in the game, you're going to be doing it to do a base hop or a very specialized mission. Think like Doolittle's Raid, right? Where it was this one-off thing where you go and bomb the Japanese islands early in the game as kind of a wake-up call for them to bring the war to their shores. Generally, you're not going to be using drop tanks and you're not going to be using it for training, certainly not for training missions. So we hopped all three of these fighters back here that do have drop tanks, and this is where that will appear. And just, always kind of think about that. If there is a longer mission that you want to run, uh, you know, there are drop tanks, so it is something to think about. Um, I think that's about it. I think I've covered, as I said, as we get more and more into the game, I'm trying to do less and less of getting down here and saying this is how you put a task force together. I think if you're with me here, you're playing the game along with me, or probably ahead of me, to be honest. You probably have figured out all of that stuff. What I'm trying to do now is point out why places are important. how in the big grand scope, how you want to use them, uh, strategy, tactics with these things, and then things that are interesting or things that we haven't encountered before, or maybe things that I just, because it was a basic tutorial, I didn't go in depth with into the tutorial. Like obviously drop tanks were not something we really needed to cover. Maybe I wish I could go back and cover merging air groups a little bit because I do know that's kind of a different sort of topic, but hopefully that made a lot of sense. If it didn't, drop me a line in the comments as always, and we will go over it as many times as you want. That's what these videos really are for. So, as always, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I certainly enjoyed making it. If you did like it and you haven't so far, go ahead and subscribe. I would appreciate that. You'll, hit the bell and you'll know when I put up a new one of these. I'm trying to do them on a day-by-day basis. For China and continental US, they took a little longer. Next time, we will have some smaller places we'll be dealing with, and I'll try to get that up. And I'm trying to do a video a day on these, but sometimes that's not possible if it's a place that's got a lot of stuff. Uh, with the holidays coming up and whatnot, I'm trying to carve out some time for that as well. So, as always, thank you so much. This is Strategy Gaming Dojo. I'll talk to you next time.